This is Tim, and we are going to talk today about rosé. Rosé wines obviously have become incredibly popular, especially in places like where we are here in the Bahamas. Warm climate, weather, summertime, sitting on patios kind of deal, and a huge push in promoting and marketing budgets has really driven the rosé market in the last 5 to 10 years. It's funny because for many years, going back, into the 70s, it was always kind of seen as a lesser wine. And now with the amount of money and promotion and marketing that's going on, it tends to be a leader in sales in a lot of the markets, especially here, like I say, in the Caribbean and into warm weather places called California and Florida, and even obviously the most famous would be the south of France, where most of the best rosé wines are actually coming from. So let's just sort of give you a little bit of a background here. Obviously, rosé refers to its color, French for rose color. This wine basically is made the same way you would make a red wine. It's made out of red grapes, but they don't leave the skins in contact with the actual pressed juice for very long. No more than 24 hours, and 24 hours being the real long, heavy, almost a red, but not a red style rosé wines, and that would be kind of like this color here. This is the traditional rosado from Spain, a very traditional rosado color, which basically is kind of like a red, but it's just a little bit lighter than a red wine, and obviously very transparent, so you can see through it. And then a very light time on the skins would be something like this from the south of France. The Domaine de Cambie is in the Saint-Chinian region, which is just above Provence. And this would probably be, only a few hours on the skins, while the Rosado style will be probably close to 20 to 24 hours on the skins, giving you that much darker, richer color, and also a much bigger flavor. So there are three ways of making rosé. The first way, and the most common, would be the skin contact method. So basically you're pressing red grapes, you leave those red grape skins in with the juice for, like I said, anywhere from 2 to 24 hours. And then you take the red skins out, leave the wine to ferment on its own without the contact of the skins. That's the most popular way of doing it, and most really good rosé is done that way. Now, there are two other ways of doing it. One is called the saignée method. It basically comes from the French word for blood. So you're kind of bleeding they refer to it as bleeding the grapes into it. So to do the saignée method, basically what it is they remove some of the juice from the must in order to more deeply concentrate the phenols. So all of the colors that are coming out of the skins, they concentrate that in a small amount of the juice, and then they add that back into the other juice that they have, creating more of a deeper, richer kind of a color without making it too intense as far as flavor goes. So it's a little bit different than the contact method, because the contact method is basically a one-time shot, and you do that right from the pressing. Whereas saignée, they take some of it, move it aside, concentrate it by reducing some of the levels, and then add it back into the fresh run juice. So there is one more method, which is the blending method, and like I said, it's kind of frowned upon, but there are a couple of people that are still doing it and trying to be traditional. And we visited one of those wineries in Spain a couple of years ago, where they make a wine which is known as claret, C-L-A-R-E-T. And basically it's adding red wine to white wine, or really I think it's more the other way around. It's adding white wine into red wine, which is very historically, very popular way of having bulk amounts of wine that are easy to drink, because you've added the softer white wine to the big heavy reds, and allowed them to pack massive amounts of wine in order to have on large trips for armies and battles. The Romans were very famous for doing this kind of a method in order to make sure that there was always enough wine going to the front. And you didn't have the ability to age and soften red wines naturally that way, so they would add white wine to it to create these clarets, and it made it much easier for them to drink these wines right away. Really, it's not done anymore. There's only 1 or 2 places that are still doing it, so it is a lesser quality of a product in the end. So let's look at what makes these things so popular. Really, I'm a huge fan of rosés, especially some of these darker ones. But especially the North American palate and obviously the French palate really goes to the lighter style. And I'm not sure why that is. I think partially it's just familiarity. They think this is what it's supposed to be. Where in reality, if you are a wine drinker, you'll find something like the lighter versions of these to be too light. They have really not a ton of character. They're refreshing and they're nice and they're quite lovely on a hot day, but they don't have any depth of character. They don't really have any real, definitive qualities that make them better than others. Whereas you start to get a little bit darker, and then you start to see a lot more character come out. Like in this one, for example, it's the Chateau de Fabrec. This is from the Costières de Nîmes, so a little bit farther north than the south of France, near the Rhone Valley. And using the same grapes, Syrah and Grenache are very classic grapes for French rosés. But they leave this a little bit longer, and you get some really beautiful berry notes, especially strawberry tends to be really predominant. Raspberry tends to be really predominant on the nose of this wine. This wine is so good. We've done blind tastings with people who are big fans of wines like Whispering Angel, and we've done blind tastings with Whispering Angel against this wine with large groups of people, up to 20 people. And this wine will pretty much win every single time. And it's just because people, they think that this is supposed to be the way wine is, but then when they actually taste the wines, they understand, well, I want a wine that has a little bit of something to it, and that's what this really is. And going along with that, let's look at this. So this is the same wine from 2 different vintages. So in 2016, and all before that, Cuatro Pasos was making this wine. This is a traditional Spanish Rosado, and they were making it in this style. Now you can see the color, and it's a fantastic wine. I mean, it's 100% Mencia, which is a black grape, really intense, full of flavor, really robust and refreshing, and tons of fruit. Really great wine. But they saw the way the market trend was going, and so they made the same wine in 2018 that looked more like a French style rosé, not a Rosado, but a rosé, right? And this is simply bending to market pressure. That's all this was. This is a great wine. It's a good wine especially for the money. It's really, really affordable. But this wine has so much more flavor. It's just so much more intense. It's such a really cool drinking experience to have a wine like this. And then they had to go and change the style in order to make it work. And now the 2019 vintage of this same wine has now gone even farther into the French style, where they even have like the very floral style bottle that you will find from a lot of French Provence style rosés. Now going even to the most extreme, this is a traditional Rosado from the Navarra region of Spain. Now, Navarra is a very hot area, so you get really heavy-duty ripe grapes here. Lots of big, dark fruits. This is a 100% Grenache from old vines. So all of these vines for this wine, it's a single vineyard. So one single plot. This is Veneto number 5. It's actually the number 5 vineyard from Signorio de Saria. This is a really great producer of really high quality wine. This is a great wine for the barbecue, for the grill, anything, especially things like jerk spice. If you're into like jerk chicken or jerk pork on your grill, this is the wine for you. Pass by the light ones, go for something big like this. It's still great. You can serve it cold. It's really refreshing, but it's got body and it's got a lot of character. This wine is a little bit higher in alcohol because Navarra is quite hot. It is the desert of Spain. 14% alcohol in that guy. So again, it's got a lot of structure, a lot of body. It will age. You don't really want to age rosés normally. That wine will age, and it will age really, really well. There is a place for all of these, right? We definitely don't want to ever discount any of these. They all have a place. I really do love this one. This is the Domaine de Cambie. It is a little different from the rest of these. It does have the Syrah that you'll get in the traditional French style rosés, but it's also mostly Cinsault, and Cinsault is really the grape of Provence. And that's where the orangey hue comes from. It's from the Cinsault. It leans more to the orange side than it does to the pink side. But it also, to me, it also lends a really fun funkiness. Cinsault is kind of a funky grape. And it has a really cool, very French flavor to it. It's the only really way I can describe that to people that they can understand. It is very, very, very French. So let's just do a little bit of history on where all these things come from. So, there was always, in Provence, there is a long history of making these blush wines, or not blush wines, sorry, rosé wines. We'll get to the difference between the two of them. In the US, it didn't start to really come together until 1975, when through making a mistake, Sutter Home was making white Zinfandel, which is basically trying to make white wine from red grapes, in that same kind of saignée production method, minimal skin contact. In 75, Sutter Home, they had a stuck fermentation problem where the yeast went dormant. In some cases, it died before the sugar content was completely absorbed by the yeast, giving you a much lower alcohol content and a much higher residual sugar. So they actually, the winemaker was a guy named Bob Trinchero, and he put the wine aside for a couple of weeks and then came back and tasted it, and he decided he was going to go with it because it was interesting and it was funky. So this is where the beginning of sweeter pink wines came from, and where the term blush comes from. So in California, sweet pink wines are known as blush wines, whereas dry pink wines are known as rosé wines. And the rest of the world, all wines, regardless of their sugar content, are basically rosé. So only really in California is there such a thing as blush. And that basically just refers to its sugar content being higher than a traditional rosé wine. They used to have a lot of these wines. After that started in the 70s, the blush thing kind of blew up. But in the later part of the 90s and into the early 2000s, the market demand for blush wines dropped significantly. It went from about 22% of all wine consumed in the US in 1997 to 15% in 2003. So a huge drop as people's palates start to get away from the sugar thing and more into the more refined versions. In the United States in 2005, The California crop was so big, it had so much excess of grapes that you really started to see a proliferation of varietals that were being used for rosés, as they trying to make rosés out of any of their red grapes instead of leaving them unsold, they started to make rosés out of all kinds of different things. So you have, again, Mencia, Syrah, Grenache, Garnacha, Cinsault, but you also can now get Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon, obviously Zinfandel, Pinot Noir. All of these are now being made into rosé style wines. I had one recently, a fantastic wine from Sonoma that was a Mourvèdre, just 100% Mourvèdre rosé, and it was gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. So get outside of your comfort zone and what you know, and try some of these newer ones, because if you like rosé, you really, really get into it. So in the last 5 years, though, rosé has absolutely exploded, like over the top explosion of purchases, mostly because in 2015, it actually, like, the whole rosé thing really went viral when men started drinking it. It wasn't just a ladies' who lunch vibe where, they were having lots of rosé while men were at work kind of thing, which is very old school. Men started to really enjoy it and use it, there was kind of a party drink. They were throwing parties around it. The whole concept of rosé all day really started to flourish in that time period. And then there was even a whole marketing campaign that was done around brosé, where it was just guys, sitting around drinking rosé. And then in 2016, the whole thing really exploded when they started doing frosé, and it started at Bar Primi in New York City, where they started making the slushy machine kind of a drink for the patio, where they were just churning rosé until it was frozen. Really, fun and obviously clever way of keeping things super chilled for the summertime and creating their own signature that ended up being really, really big all over the world. So when we talk about the color, obviously, depending on the grape variety, you're going to end up with different colors, as we've already talked about. So this is more the very traditional super pinky rose color, then into almost an orangey color here with this. And depending on the grape variety, you really do get such a huge variety in colors in the spectrum of rosé that you can actually go through, anywhere from melon, like a cantaloupe style, orange, peach, red currant, grapefruit, mango, mandarins. It goes from all different shades of orange and pink, and almost into the reds and the violets, where you can actually start to see the broad spectrum of rosé. As far as what you should be looking for, obviously when it comes to these kind of things, it's obviously very much personal preference. But for me, I do appreciate some of the ones that are a little bit more structured, a little bit more these are unique in themselves, the darker ones. But as a rosé, I tend to go with something a little more structure for me than the lighter ones, just because to me, they lend themselves a little bit more to different food a little bit better than the lighter ones. If you're just sipping on the patio, then for sure I'm gonna probably go with something like the Domaine de Camby, which tends to be our Sunday afternoon ritual, sitting by the pool. But they definitely are gonna be a little bit different. And the fruit characters of all of these rosés are coming to fruition because they're extracting the grape skin in maceration at temperatures below 20 Celsius. So it's a cold fermentation, kind of like if you took a tea bag and you try to steep a tea bag in cold water versus warm water, you're going to end up with very different extraction, and you're going to have all kinds of different floral compounds that are kind of muted because you didn't release them during the extraction process, and you're left with, you know, really fruity flavors, which is really cool. Let's talk about what you should be eating with these things. In Provence, really, the rosé is such a huge part of Provençal style culture. It really tends to go a lot with, you know, the seafood of the region, bouillabaisse, a lot of those Provençal style stewed dishes, and really garlicky aioli sauces, like riz and things like that, pair super well with the Provence style rosé. I tend to, you know, like ones a little bit heavier, things like the Rhone style rosés, like this guy. Definitely gonna look at, you know, things from the grill, a little bit warmer, some, you know, white meats, chicken or pork, things like that. Even some fish dishes that have a little bit more structure to them, a little bit of weight to them. Then, you know, these little structured ones are very cool. And then things with big spice, things with, you know, in a little bit heavy, intense heat, stronger meats, game meats, anything off a really smoky grill, barbecue, nothing like American barbecue, and something like one of these dark reds. The darker rosé stuff from Spain is amazing with American barbecue. So, I mean, you know, the rosé market is really taking off, and if you're not necessarily someone who's ever really wanted to get into it, you don't really know where to start with it, obviously we can help you with, you know, answering your questions. And just, you know, send us a message and let us know what it is that you're trying to find, what you're looking for, and how you want to use it, whether it's just for, you know, sipping. Do you want it a little bit sweeter? Do you like it dry? All of these wines, by the way, that I have in front of me today are all very dry. So if you're looking for something in that vein, then we've definitely got you covered. There's a million rosés out there, a million of them, and they come from all over the world: Italy, France, US, Canada, Spain, Portugal. You know, they're even starting to see, I mean, some of the colder weather countries, Austria is making some beautiful rosé. You'll find them in like places like Bulgaria and Slovenia. Really crazy how much production of rosé there is out there now. So go out there and see if you can't find yourself a few rosés that you want to keep around the house for those, you know, sitting around the afternoon, sunny day kind of vibes. Lovely summer days out on the boat, go to the beach, and, you know, sitting around the barbecue. It really is the drink for all of those occasions. It's a great summertime drink, especially if you try to stay away from the sugar a little bit so you don't get the hangover the next morning. So I hope you enjoyed our little talk here about rosé, and I hope you go out and grab yourself a little bit and toast yourself for the weekend. So thanks guys for watching again. We'll be back again soon. Cheers.